The horizon burned orange as the wagon train pulled farther into the dust, leaving nothing but wheel scars and the smell of gunpowder behind. Clara Mae clutched her side, fingers trembling, feeling the sticky warmth of her own blood. The sky spun above her, a dizzy carousel of bruised clouds and fading sun. She called out, a ragged sound that barely carried in the dry wind. No one turned back. They had decided she was a lost cause. She remembered the moment they'd spoken it when Mr. Peterson, the man who once praised her sewing, muttered, "She'll only slow us down," and her would-be husband, stiff-jawed and hollow-eyed, hadn't argued. Somewhere in her gut, Clara had always known her place among them was conditional, a fragile arrangement of convenience and duty. When the arrows flew and chaos shattered the afternoon peace, she became a liability too heavy to bear. Her breath hitched. She lay sprawled in the churned-up earth, one boot missing, hair tangled with blood and grit. The world smelled of iron and scorched wood. A coyote yipped somewhere beyond the ridge, its call thin and mocking. Clara shifted, pain flaring sharp enough to blind her for a moment. Her skirts were torn, the left side of her ribs blooming dark beneath the fabric. They'd left her to the wolves, literal or otherwise. The heat drained from her body as dusk crept in. She thought of her father, cold and rigid as the pulpit he preached from. She thought of her mother, already a ghost when Clara was small enough to be carried. She thought of Mr. Benton, the man she was supposed to marry, his rough hand on her wrist the night he promised, "You'll learn to be grateful." Her lips twisted in a weak, bitter smile. If dying meant she'd never have to call him husband, maybe it wasn't such a loss after all. The sound came first, the soft crunch of approaching footsteps over dry brush. Clara's heart stuttered, her fingers scrabbling for the knife tucked uselessly in her ruined bodice. She couldn't lift it. She couldn't even lift herself. A shadow broke from the ridge, darker than the failing light, and moved toward her with fluid purpose. Not a coyote, not a settler, something else. The figure crouched beside her. She flinched, expecting a finishing blow. But the stranger didn't strike. A calloused hand, surprisingly gentle, brushed hair from her fevered forehead. In the dimness, she caught a glimpse of him. Black hair tied back, skin bronze and dusted with ash, eyes sharp and watchful. A savage, her father would have called him. A devil in human skin. Clara wanted to cry out, to push him away, but all she could manage was a shudder. The man's face betrayed no malice. He inspected her side, fingers deft but careful, and made a soft sound. Half concern, half calculation. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the barren landscape, then back to her. Without ceremony, he slid his arms under her broken body and lifted. Pain ripped through her, a fresh agony that yanked a strangled cry from her lips. For a heartbeat, the world went black. When she surfaced again, she was draped across a horse, the coarse mane scratching her cheek, the warm smell of animal sweat mixing with the blood on her skin. She tried to struggle, a feeble thrashing. The man clicked his tongue softly, a sound of reassurance or warning. Clara couldn't tell. He mounted, behind her, with the ease of someone who had done this before. His arms anchored her securely as the horse picked up a steady, loping gait. Clara's mind drifted, untethered from her body. Memory surged, riding beside the wagons under endless skies, laughing over stolen apples, weaving dreams of the life she'd build at the frontier's edge. She saw her father's boots by the hearth, the last time he ever stood sober. She saw Benton scowl, his ring gleaming like a brand on his hand. The horse's rhythm rocked her. The pain in her side was a drumbeat, keeping time with her fading heartbeat. Fear fought with exhaustion. Was she being rescued or simply carried to another death? The rider said nothing. His grip was firm, his warmth steady against her back. The land blurred past, skeletal trees yawning gulches, patches of brittle grass that whispered secrets to the rising wind. Night unfurled fully, a heavy shroud of darkness peppered with stars. Clara tried to keep her eyes open, tried to mark the direction he took, but her body betrayed her. Her lashes fluttered, breath slowing. The last thing she remembered was the steady murmur of the horse's hooves, the stranger's heartbeat thudding against her spine, and the whisper of her own voice, broken and soft as prayer. "Please don't let me die alone." The words dissolved into the night air. Clara surrendered to the dark. The first thing Clara noticed was the smell. Not blood, not smoke, but something sharp and earthy, like crushed sage and damp stone. She peeled her eyes open slowly, lashes sticky, vision swimming in and out of focus. Above her, the rock walls of a narrow canyon rose jagged and immense, slicing into the pale morning sky. Shadows stretched long across the ground, cool against the heat radiating from her fevered skin. Somewhere close, a fire crackled and popped, sending up thin ribbons of smoke. She shifted, and pain screamed through her ribs. A gasp tore from her throat before she could stop it. Instantly, movement stirred nearby. The man, the one who had found her, appeared at her side, crouching low. His expression was unreadable, but there was something steady in the way he looked at her, like he was weighing her life in his hands again. Clara recoiled instinctively, dragging herself backward a few inches before her strength gave out. Her breath came in ragged pulls. Every inch of her body protested the movement. He raised both hands in a slow, deliberate motion, not threatening, not closing the distance. A gesture that said, "Stay calm, you're safe." Clara's heart hammered against her broken ribs. She didn't feel safe. She felt trapped between worlds, one that had already abandoned her, and another she couldn't begin to understand. He spoke a few words in a language she didn't recognize, low, musical syllables carried by the wind. Then, carefully, he dipped a strip of cloth into a wooden bowl beside the fire and pressed it gently against her forehead. The coolness bled into her burning skin, and despite herself, Clara sagged into the touch. He worked methodically, cleaning the grime and blood from her side with a damp cloth. His movements were confident, efficient. When she whimpered at the sting, he murmured something under his breath, a soothing sound, even if she didn't know the meaning. She should have been terrified. But fear required energy, and Clara barely had the strength to breathe. For a long time, she watched him through half-lidded eyes. His hair was long, tied away from his face. His clothing was stitched from leather and cloth, adorned with simple beading. His hands were rough with calluses, but his touch was careful, almost reverent. When he finished tending to her, he settled the blanket over her shoulders and stepped back. Clara felt the weight of his gaze linger a moment longer before he turned away. She lay there, heart rattling in her chest, the fire's warmth soaking into her bones. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning inside the canyon. The man came and went, bringing her water, feeding the fire, sometimes leaving for stretches that filled Clara with a gnawing unease. Each time he returned, a little of her panic eased. She hated that she depended on him, hated that she needed anyone. On the third day, or what she guessed was the third, he offered her food, a piece of roasted rabbit wrapped in a broad green leaf. Clara's stomach twisted painfully at the smell, but she forced herself to take a bite. The meat was dry, smoky, unfamiliar. She coughed and nearly choked. The man chuckled, a soft, genuine sound. Clara blinked at him, startled. It was the first time she'd seen anything resembling amusement cross his features. "Food," he said slowly, tapping his chest. "Good." His voice was rough, accented, but clear enough. Clara narrowed her eyes, wary of the attempt at conversation, but some stubborn, battered part of her refused to be the helpless victim anymore. "Clara," she croaked, tapping her own chest. "My name." He watched her carefully, then nodded once. "Tatsiai." She repeated it under her breath, uncertain if she said it right. A flicker of approval lit his face. Their fragile truce grew stronger with each halting exchange. He taught her simple words, water, fire, sky, miming their meanings with exaggerated gestures. She corrected him once when he called a rock a horse, and the deep laugh that followed startled her so much she almost smiled. Still, fear lurked at the edges. In the evenings, Clara would sit propped against the canyon wall, blanket clutched tightly around her, and wonder what price her rescue carried. Stories she'd heard whispered around campfires, tales of captives stolen away, colored her thoughts black. Yet Tatsiai made no move to chain her, no demand she couldn't refuse. He treated her injuries, shared his food, even fashioned a makeshift crutch to help her hobble around when her strength began returning. Once, while she struggled to balance herself upright, he caught her elbow to steady her. Their eyes locked. The touch was brief, impersonal, but Clara flushed all the same. She hated the suspicion that clung to her. Hated even more how a small, shameful part of her longed to trust him. The canyon sheltered them from the worst of the outside world. Nights were cold but bearable with the fire and the thick blankets Tatsuya layered around her. When a summer storm swept down from the north, he built a quick shelter against the canyon wall, lashing wood and hide with swift, practiced hands. Lightning tore the sky open in ragged slashes, thunder shaking the ground under them. Clara huddled inside the lean-to, shivering with fear and cold. Tatsuya sat a few feet away, sharpening a stone-tipped spear, calm as a stone himself. After a long stretch of silence, Clara found herself speaking without thinking. "They left me," she whispered, voice raw. "Left me to die." Tatsuya glanced up from his work. His gaze was heavy, full of things he couldn't say. She didn't know why she spoke the words aloud. Maybe she needed someone to hear them, to make it real. "I wasn't good enough," she said bitterly. "Not worth the trouble." Tatsuya set the spear down gently. Then, without a word, he drew a line in the dirt with his finger, a wagon wheel, unmistakable even in the crude simplicity of the sketch. Next to it, a smaller figure with a broken line drawn through it. Clara stared at it, heart pounding. He wiped it away with a sweep of his hand, then pointed to her, then to the canyon, then to himself. Here, alive, with him. The simple gesture struck something deep inside her, a place so bruised and hollow she'd almost forgotten it existed. The rain eased into a soft patter. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows against the stone. That night, for the first time since the wagons disappeared over the horizon, Clara slept without dreaming of teeth and claws tearing at her bones. When she woke, Tatsuya was gone. Panic clawed at her throat. She struggled upright, ignoring the protest of her ribs, and limped to the canyon's mouth. Beyond, endless plains stretched into the morning mist. A horse's whinny caught her attention. She turned just as Tatsuya appeared, leading a second horse behind him. This one was smaller, a young chestnut mare with an impatient toss of her head. Tatsuya approached slowly, holding out the reins like an offering. Clara blinked, unsure if she was understanding correctly. He motioned toward the horse, then to her, then mimed riding. Freedom. A chance to leave, if she chose it. Her legs nearly buckled under her. For a long moment, she just stared at him, the reins dangling between them. If she took them, what would she be leaving behind? And what would she be riding toward? The canyon winds whispered around them, tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of sage and rain. The fire behind her hissed as it died down to embers. Clara reached out and closed her fingers around the reins. The plains shimmered under the punishing midday sun, a sea of gold and brown stretching into forever. Clara gripped the reins tighter, the leather slick with sweat under her palms. The young mare moved restlessly beneath her, sensing her unease. Tatsuya rode ahead, silent as ever, his figure blending into the endless landscape like he was a part of it. For days they had traveled, each mile pulling Clara further from the place where she'd been left to die, and closer to something she couldn't name. At night, they camped in the shelter of rocky outcrops, sharing simple meals and quiet company. Clara learned to gather firewood, to find hidden water by reading the dips and swells of the land. Her body toughened, bruises fading into hard-earned strength. The ache in her ribs dulled to a memory. Yet a different ache had settled in her chest, deeper and more stubborn. Every time she caught herself smiling when Tatsuya showed her how to loose an arrow from a bow, every time she laughed at the rare but sharp jokes he made with a glance or a muttered word, guilt gnawed at her. She wasn't meant to belong here. She wasn't meant to survive. Some nights, she dreamed of the wagons again, hearing the rumble of wheels, the crack of whips, the rough songs of the settlers. She dreamed of Benton's voice, soft and dangerous, whispering promises into her ear. She woke gasping, the fire's embers painting the world in shades of red and black. Tatsuya never asked what haunted her sleep. He only waited, quiet and patient, until she found her breath again. On the fifth morning, Clara spotted smoke curling in the distance, thin and white against the sky. Tatsuya's body stiffened the moment he saw it. He motioned for her to stay close, his posture alert. They rode toward it slowly, every step measured. The air smelled of charred wood and dust. As they crested a low ridge, Clara saw them, wagons. Settlers. Not a whole train, but a broken splinter of one. Half a dozen families circled tight, their animals hobbled, their people moving with a wary, worn-out kind of desperation. The sight hit her like a hammer to the chest. She could make out faces, vague at this distance, but achingly familiar. Mr. Peterson, fussing over a broken axle. Mrs. Carver, hanging strips of meat to dry on a low rack. Children darting between the wheels, thin and dirty. And Benton, tall, broad-shouldered, his back turned as he spoke to a cluster of men. His hat was pulled low, but Clara would have known him by the tilt of his shoulders alone. She reeled back, bow rising in her throat. Tatsuya touched her arm lightly, pulling her behind a scrub of low brush. His eyes searched hers, questioning. Clara shook her head violently. She couldn't face them. She wouldn't. Every memory sharpened with vicious clarity. The way Benton had seized her wrist hard enough to leave bruises when she protested their engagement. The whispered warnings from women who dared not speak too loudly. The final, gutting moment when the wagon master declared her a burden and Benton hadn't spoken a word in her defense. She tasted blood where she bit her lip too hard. Tatsuya crouched beside her, patient and steady, waiting for her to decide. The settlers camped too close to the only water source for miles. Avoiding them would mean hardship, maybe even danger. But Clara couldn't bear to put herself within reach of those who had once weighed her life and found it expendable. "We go," she said hoarsely, pointing west, away from the wagons. Tatsuya gave a small nod. No questions. No argument. They swung wide around the settlement, staying low and silent among the rocks. Clara didn't breathe properly until the smoke disappeared behind them. That night, the fire burned low between them. Clara sat staring into it, the heat prickling her face. She hadn't spoken a word since they passed the wagons. Tatsuya shifted, then spoke, his voice low and careful. "Bad people." Clara nodded slowly. He considered that a moment, then shrugged with a fatalistic tilt of his shoulders. "Many bad people." It should have been a comfort, that simple truth, but Clara felt the words open a fresh wound inside her. "I was supposed to marry one of them," she said, her voice so small it nearly vanished into the night. "Thought I had no choice." Tatsuya's eyes reflected the firelight, sharp and unblinking. "You have choice," he said. The words lodged in her chest like a splinter. She hugged her knees closer to her body. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. Tatsuya tilted his head slightly, as if he found the confession strange. "You are Clara." As if it were that simple. She almost laughed, but the sound curdled in her throat. Instead, she wiped at her eyes roughly, pretending it was just smoke making them water. The days that followed stretched taut with tension. The land grew harsher, hard, cracked earth and relentless sun. Food was scarce, water scarcer. Late one afternoon, Clara bent to refill their water skins at a muddy trickle of a stream when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant, but approaching fast. She froze. Tatsuya had gone ahead to scout a safe trail. Alone, Clara was exposed. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she ducked into a copse of scraggly trees. Peering through the branches, she saw them crest the ridge, 3 riders, settlers by their clothing, guns glinting at their hips. Bounty hunters, maybe, or deserters looking for easy prey. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She crouched lower, clutching the knife Tatsuya had given her days ago, a simple thing, but sharp enough to kill if she aimed true. The riders dismounted by the stream, watering their horses. They laughed, rough and crude, talking loudly enough for snatches of conversation to carry on the wind. "Damn Injuns all over this territory. Heard a girl got carried off last season, pretty one too." Laughter. Clara's stomach turned. One of the men wandered dangerously close to her hiding place, relieving himself against a stunted tree. She pressed herself into the shadows, breath locked in her throat. A soft snap of a twig sounded behind her. She spun, knife raised, and almost slashed Tatsiai across the chest. He caught her wrist before the blade could find its mark, his grip iron. His eyes flicked from her to the riders beyond, assessing the situation in a heartbeat. Without a word, he motioned for her to follow. They slipped away like ghosts, moving with the quiet urgency of hunted things. It wasn't until they were a mile away, the riders mere specks on the horizon, that Clara allowed herself to breathe. Tatsiai stopped at a rocky outcrop and turned to face her, his expression grim. "You must learn," he said. "Danger everywhere." Clara nodded, shame burning her cheeks. That night, by the fire, he placed the knife between them and gestured for her to pick it up. Again, he said, and again, until her hands stopped trembling and her cuts landed true. Every stroke of the blade, every bruised muscle, every aching breath, it all burned away the last tattered remnants of the girl she had been. The girl who had waited for permission, for rescue. No more. As she drove the knife into a stuffed bundle he set up for practice, Clara felt the first flicker of something fierce and real rising inside her. Not hatred, not vengeance. Survival. When she finally collapsed by the fire, exhausted, she saw Tatsiai watching her with a look she couldn't name. Not pity. Respect. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, the stars spinning cold and brilliant overhead, and for the first time, she didn't dread the dreams waiting for her. She was no longer the girl left behind, and she sure as hell wasn't anyone's burden. The mountains rose ahead, their jagged peaks clawing at a sky bruised purple and gold. Clara shifted in her saddle, the motion easy now, almost second nature. Her body, once fragile and hesitant, moved with the horse as if the two were stitched together by some invisible thread. Dust clung to her skin, her hair wild around her face, but she no longer cared. She had learned to belong to the land the way Tatsiai did, by respecting it, by listening to its silences. Beside her, Tatsiai rode with quiet focus, his eyes scanning the horizon with that unshakable calm she had come to depend on. He was her compass in this wild place, but he was no longer a guide leading a helpless traveler. Now he was a partner riding alongside someone who had earned her place. Days blurred into each other. They moved with the seasons, hunting when the prey was fat, resting in hidden valleys when storms tore across the plains. Clara's muscles grew lean, her hands rough and sure. She could track a deer through the high brush. She could read the sky's moods in a glance. She had not just survived. She had transformed. But survival, she learned, was never something you finished. It was a blade you sharpened every morning, a skill you dared not let dull. Danger still prowled beyond the next ridge, silent and hungry. One evening, as they camped in the shelter of a hollowed-out cliff, Tatsiai handed Clara a woven band made from leather and beads, simple, yet crafted with a reverence that made her throat tighten. She turned it over in her fingers, the firelight catching the tiny, meticulous details. It was beautiful. She looked up at him, unsure. He said nothing at first, only watched her with that same patient certainty that had saved her life without a word spoken. Then he placed his palm over his heart and spoke one word. Together. The world tilted under her feet. It was not a demand. It was not a rescue. It was a choice, placed gently in her hands. Clara closed her fingers around the band, feeling its strength and softness, its promise. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. The wedding was not a grand affair. No preacher, no formal vows carved in books. Instead, it was a circle of stone and sky, a few solemn words spoken in Tatsiai's native tongue, and a handful of herbs burned to send their promises into the air. Clara stood in her worn boots, a dress mended half a dozen times, with a piece of red cloth braided into her hair. When Tatsiai took her hand, rough palm against rough palm, Clara felt the earth steady under her feet in a way it never had before. That night, under a canopy of stars so bright they looked close enough to touch, Clara lay awake, listening to Tatsiai's breathing beside her. She traced the scars on her arms with her fingertips, each one a story, a lesson, a proof. She wasn't who she had been. She wasn't who they had tried to make her. She was Clara, and she was alive in the way few people ever dared to be. The peace didn't last. It came one crisp morning when the air tasted of snow and the sky had the brittle clarity of approaching winter. Totsiai spotted the tracks first, deep ruts carved into the soft earth, horses shod with iron shoes, too many of them. Smoke rising beyond the ridge, dark and oily. Settlers. Not a family struggling westward. Not travelers passing through. A militia. Clara's gut twisted the moment she saw them. 40 men, maybe more, armed with rifles and grim intent, camped near the mouth of a narrow valley. The same valley where a Navajo clan Totsiai often traded with had taken shelter for the winter. Her blood went cold. "They'll attack," she said, voice flat with certainty. Totsiai nodded once. In the old days, the girl she had been would have hidden, would have run. But Clara didn't flinch. She drew her knife and checked the tension of the bow Totsiai had taught her to use. Her hands were steady. The decision was never spoken aloud between them. It didn't need to be. That night, they rode hard across the broken land, slipping through the dark like shadows made flesh. Clara's heart pounded with fear, yes, but also with something fierce and resolute. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting for her people now, for the life she had chosen. They reached the Navajo camp just before dawn. Families stirred to life, wary and alert at Totsiai's warnings. Clara helped where she could, gathering children, packing supplies for flight if needed. The militia came with the sun. The first shot cracked the morning open like a whip. Shouts rang out, hoarse and hungry for blood. The camp erupted into chaos. Clara moved without thinking. She loosed arrows from her bow, sharp and fast. Totsiai fought at her side, a whirlwind of brutal precision. The settlers weren't prepared for resistance. They had expected easy prey. Clara ducked low, rolling between two boulders as a bullet whined past her ear. Her knife found a man's leg as he stumbled too close, sending him sprawling. She didn't stay to watch him fall. Her lungs burned with smoke and dust. Her arms ached from firing, but she didn't stop. A settler on horseback charged toward a cluster of fleeing women and children. Clara sprinted across the open ground, heart hammering. She fired, and the arrow struck true, sending the rider tumbling from the saddle. The old Clara would have wept for the blood on her hands. This Clara understood the cost of mercy when it wasn't earned. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. When it was over, the ground was scarred and smoking. The survivors huddled around the wounded. The militia, beaten and humiliated, retreated into the hills, leaving their dead behind. Clara knelt in the dirt, gasping, her bow limp in her hand. Totsiai found her there, blood smeared across his chest, a gash weeping along his arm. He crouched down, touching her cheek with fingers that trembled only slightly. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes. They had won for now. Victory was never final in a place like this. But for today, for this heartbeat of a moment, they had carved out a piece of freedom with their own hands. Later, when the camp was quiet and the fires burned low, Clara sat on a rise overlooking the battered valley. The stars blinked down, patient and ancient, bearing silent witness to everything lost and everything gained. Totsiai sat beside her, his presence as steady as the earth itself. She looked at him, then at the dark stretch of land beyond the horizon. "Do you think there's a place," she said softly, "where people like us can live without always having to fight?" Totsiai was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a rare, fierce smile that lit his whole face. "Maybe," he said. "But if not, we make one." Clara laughed, a low, surprised sound pulled from deep in her chest. She slipped her hand into his, rough palm against rough palm. Tomorrow they would move again, chasing the fragile thread of peace wherever it led. Tomorrow they would build something new from the ashes. Tonight they simply lived. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every story deserves to be remembered.